my god! He is absolute What an absolute prat! You can't, if you're not watching the game, if you're not listening to the game, bloody hell,
While Alduin threatening to turn Nirn into an all-you-can-eat buffet makes him the main villain of Skyrim, the enemy that everyone seems to still be talking about is the Thalmor. They are the outside threat that we don't take down, and unlike Harkon, Merak or Alduin, it's clear that we won't be seeing the last of them. Granted, we deal them a few blows here and there, but the Thalmor are a major enemy long before Skyrim and remain an enemy long after, likely getting a spotlight in the Elder Scrolls 6, coming to you sometime this decade. Probably. Please? Still, the question of what the Thalmor actually want and how they go about doing this is far more complicated than it may seem. On the surface, they're an Altmer supremacist organisation that wants to take over Tamriel, subjugating everything that isn't a high elf. But if you look into their lore, they're somehow worse than this. But before we look into what the Thalmor want, we're going to have to talk about the Aldmeri Dominion, which is going to take a while. So pull up a chair in the library, get comfortable, and let's talk about the worst kind of Mer in Tamriel.
The Empire, in its wisdom, has come to recognize Talos worship as a barbaric remnant of a bygone age.
Now, the Thalmor and the Aldmeri Dominion are linked, but are separate entities. In short, think of the Thalmor like the ruling party of the Somerset Isles, while the Aldmeri Dominion is like another empire. The third Aldmeri Dominion, the one in Skyrim, is made up of the Somerset Isles and Valenwood, with Palatine and Anaquina, two provinces making up a split Elsweyr, being two client states of the Dominion. While it is the third iteration of this elven alliance, it is quite different to its previous versions, but the one thing that has remained the same is the people involved. You see, the Altmer of the Somerset Isles and the Bosmer of Valenwood have always been fast allies since the formation of the first Aldmeri Dominion in the Second Era during the Interregnum. This was the period after the fall of the Second Cyrodiilic Empire, founded by Remen Cyrodiil, and for whatever reason, they also sought to get the Khajiit involved, forming a mini-empire to protect each other. The Dominion was the brainchild of Aaron Arana, who, before ascending to the throne of Alinor in the Somerset Isles, did some travelling in the recently fractured Tamriel. After basically coming to the conclusion that it was a madhouse out there, and that the Altmer should huddle with their friends for safety, she formed the Aldmeri Dominion. Now at the time, Elsweyr suffered from a terrible plague, and Valenwood was in the middle of a civil war, with both provinces asking the Somerset Isles for aid, so it wasn't as though this was a forceful occupation. You could even argue that the first Aldmeri Dominion was a relatively friendly affair, at least compared to the absolute cruelty of the Thalmor's third Dominion. When the time came for the first Dominion to go truly continental, they set their sights on the Ruby Throne, hoping to rule over all of Tamriel and bring elven rule back to the continent. I suppose like the times of the Merethic era. But this was never meant to be. The Dominion found itself against rival alliances, the Daggerfall Covenant and the Ebonheart Pack, and together these are the three factions in ESO. All three wanted to put their guy's butt on the Ruby Throne, but as we know from history, this was also not meant to be. Before the Interregnum had ended, all three would collapse, and Tiber Septim would come out of nowhere to eventually ascend the throne as the founder of the Third Cyrodiilic Empire, and then become a god. Still, we're not leaving the Interregnum quite yet. After the fall of the first Aldmeri Dominion, the Altmer saw a chance to run it back when Valenwood had yet another civil dispute. You see, there's quite a cultural divide between the more modern Bosmer and the more primitive tribes living in the wilderness of the Gratoaks, and this often leads to the country being quite divided. The heirs of the Camoran dynasty used this chaos to make a claim to the throne, and in response, some in Valenwood sought their enemies in the Colovian estates for aid, thus pledging a portion of Valenwood to them. In response, the Aldmeri conquered the country, using a stewardship clause in an 1,000-year-old treaty between their nations to justify the invasion, thus forming the Second Aldmeri Dominion in 2E 830. About 250 years after the first one. This is where our villainous protagonist enters the picture. The Thalmor, the new government in Valenwood, established on behalf of the Aldmeri-backed claimant, Cameron Aneximus, whose ancestors had made the treaty that caused the invasion in the first place. From here, the forces of the Colovian estates were forced out of Valenwood and back into what would later reform as Cyrodiil, and the Second Aldmeri Dominion consolidated its power from here on, making allies with the Reachmen, who would later become the Forsworn in Skyrim's time. Their ally shortlist also includes the Malmö, Sea Elves of Pandonia, and apparently made a treaty with the Elsweyr Confederacy. This Aldmeri Dominion was a mighty one, and even when Tiber Septim came crashing into the picture, the Aldmer's opposing empire proved to be a stalwart force against the Dragonborn Emperor. Still, it would not last forever, as we well know. Tiber Septim conquered all of Tamriel after all, and I want you to note a few things about the way he defeated this dominion. An important thing to remember is that the Thalmor are technically a ruling faction at the time, and while they aren't on top like they are in the 4th era, they are a powerful party in Valenwood. Elves also live for a very long time. They don't kick around for practically eternity like the Lord of the Rings elves, but it is possible, although rare, for them to live for over 1,000 years. For an extreme example, take Knight Paladin Gelibor. While he's a snow elf, he is still an elf, and would have been around in the Merithic era, making him not too much younger than some dragons under Alduin. The reason I bring this up is because while generations have passed between this time period and the time of Skyrim for humans, some elves might even remember what Tiber Septim did to conquer their nations. It's easier to consider the man a god when you weren't around when he was, whereas for the elves they remember him being that mortal man. An emperor, sure, but still a mortal man. And it's not like Tiber Septim used his own godly power to conquer these elven realms. He had got the Numidium from the Dunmer of Morrowind, and had found a way to power it without using the Heart of Lorkhan. I won't go over this in detail here because it's very complicated, but if you are interested, here is a video all about Talos. Either way, through this artificial god, which also doubled as a Dwemer Jaeger, the Second Aldmeri Dominion and the people in the Thalmor were forced to watch as their elven empire, likely harbouring ambitions to bring back elven rule to Tamriel like the good old days, was forced under the heel of a man. The painful irony of this was that this man used a giant mech built by underground elves, the Dwemer, which was then given to him in parts by Ashy elves, the Dunmer. Then they had to watch this dude apparently become a god. Now I say apparently because as far as these elves were concerned, he was a dude using hacks to cheat his way to a win, and then proceeded to wine and dine off this cheating. Now we obviously know that Talos is a full-on god, which I explain in the aforementioned Talos video, but also you get his blessing, so what more proof do you really need? But you have to understand, it is a bitter pill to swallow. Especially because Tiber had ascended straight to the status of divine, alongside the Eight, which isn't something any other mortal who ascended to godhood had actually managed to do. This is one of those cases where sweet denial is better than swallowing the bitter truth. And this entire situation was especially bitter for the Thalmor. They were now elves stuck being ruled by a human, and his dynasty, and unlike the people of Morrowind, didn't get to keep their autonomy. Still, there wasn't really a lot they could do about it for quite a long time, and the Thalmor were no longer the ruling party of Valenwood. They ended up being a minority voice in the Somerset Isles, and while they had plenty of power still left over from the Second Aldmeri Dominion days, they weren't really being taken all that seriously. For the time being, the Aldmer were forced to be a part of this new empire, although it's not like they didn't flourish like the rest of the continent, at least for the most part. Tiber Septon's rule in particular was known as a Golden Age, and because of this, the Thalmor were sort of on the fringes at this point, and I guess the only reason why they weren't completely disbanded was due to their rich history. But they didn't rule Valenwood anymore, and so they no longer had the purpose which had made them so powerful. While I mentioned their role in the Second Aldmeri Dominion, they had actually began as an obscure council group in the Aldmeri government during the Aldmeri Dominion. That's Aldmeri, as in High Elves, and Aldmeri as in Elves in general. And the Thalmor were tasked with safeguarding Aldmeri heritage, which is probably where their obsession with bringing back the good old days when elves ruled the continent came from. Their role got expanded when the first Aldmeri Dominion was founded as a sort of Dominion law enforcement. This included sub-factions like the Fists of the Thalmor, the Divine Prosecution, and the K-Thalmor. I bring this up because it's important to note how instrumental the Thalmor were in both Aldmeri Dominions. Their histories are very much intertwined, and the organisation always had a role in the Dominions, yet when the Empire came along, they had no real purpose anymore. They had been pushed to the periphery by a human who had become a divine, and if you pair this with their history of safeguarding Aldmeri heritage, it follows that they started to become extreme in their beliefs, and their hatred of men, stemming specifically from Talos.
Your life is nothing. You serve zero purpose. You should kill yourself now and give somebody else a piece of that oxygen and ozone layer that's covered up so that we can breathe inside this blue trapped bubble. Because what are you here for? To worship
Talos.
Yourself. I mean that with 100%, with 1,000%.
Now armed with this added hatred, the Thalmor re-emerged late in the Third Era as a radical, xenophobic political movement, believing in elven supremacy. For the most part, they were largely ignored because elves were currently being ruled by men. So, you know, it's hard to believe that you're all supreme when a dude with 1/10 of your lifespan is calling the shots. It's like believing humanity is the superior race when a sentient dog is in charge and he still has the lifespan of a regular dog. Actually, didn't Dragon Ball do that? Is this how the Thalmor see Tiber Septim? I wonder. Still, the Thalmor would not be in the periphery forever, and this all changed when the Fire Nation the Oblivion Crisis happened. Same thing really. The Oblivion Crisis hit everyone hard. Except for the Argonians, apparently. They were loving it, going full Doomslayer because the Hist apparently gave them steroids that made them Argonian super soldiers. But this video isn't about those scaly chads. No, you see, being an island nation proved to be a monumental pain for the Altmer of the Somerset Isles. Mehrunes Dagon was in fact the storm that was approaching, and these storms surrounded the Isles, preventing any way to sail to safety. Now remember that I mentioned that the Thalmor, while largely ignored, still had power, and this power actually came in useful. At least allegedly. They claimed to have shut at least a few Oblivion portals, although we don't know if this is true because the Thalmor are serial liars and professional pot stirrers. They didn't really help the Somerset Isles too much, since Dagon's Hell Squad had driven most of the Altmer to the Crystal Tower, one of the ancient mystical towers that stabilised the Mundus, or the universe. It also doubled as a magic school, and was where the Altmer made their last stand, apparently under the command of the Thalmor. Well, the Thalmor were credited, but again, they could have made the person who actually did this disappear, old secret police style, and then have taken the credit. But this was where their propaganda machine began to come into full effect. Still, whether the Thalmor defended the tower or not, it does not end very well for anyone. One thing I need to say is that the Oblivion Crisis was far crazier than Oblivion would have you believe, given how goofy the game is. Whole cities fell, millions across the continent lost their lives, and the death toll in that short period of time would have been unlike anything Tamriel had seen since Pelennor Whitestrake was throwing a hissy fit and giving away spoilers. Apparently, the danger went full World War Z on the Crystal Tower, and as the Altmer made their last stand, the bodies of their foes began to form mountains, which seemingly endless Daedra clambered on top of. They caused tremors, earthquakes that not even the mighty Crystal Tower could withstand, and despite the best efforts of the High Elves, who believed the Crystal Tower would never fall, it eventually crumbled. The Altmer were at Dagon's mercy, until Martin Septim went full Shenron, bashed up the Daedric Prince, then remembered he's played by Sean Bean and had a dramatic death. Rest in peace, my Emperor. Things would have gone a lot better if you survived. But he didn't, because again, he's played by Sean Bean. And trouble really started brewing when the Thalmor took credit for much of the defence of the Somerset Isles, and thus gained a considerable amount of political power and public affection. This meant their philosophy of Aldmeri supremacy began to catch fire. This also coincided with the end of the Septim dynasty, and thus the first real era of weakness and uncertainty since Tiber Septim took the Ruby Throne. Now, whether you believe the Thalmor were heroes in the Oblivion Crisis or not, and I'm willing to bet most of you don't, the one thing they are is opportunistic. In 4E, Year 6, the Thalmor apparently egged on the Argonians, who were hot off the heels of playing the Uno reverse card on the Daedra. Because the Argonians had done so well during the Oblivion Crisis, they actually ended up stronger following it, and thus decided they didn't need the Empire anymore. With them being independent, the Thalmor thought it'd be a good idea to get them to invade Morrowind, and the Argonians were more than up for it, ready to take revenge for years of farm tool mistreatment. Because of all the hissed steroids and the whole Doomslayer situation, this was sort of a perfect nexus for the Argonians to launch this invasion. This was just after the Red Year, essentially the Dunmer version of 2020, where everything that could have gone wrong did. Because the Argonians took the bait and went all in on the Dunmer, this caused a lot of friction for the Empire, because one of their provinces had just been attacked, but they weren't in a position to offer any aid, at least from Cyrodiil. Although you might find it hard to believe now, Skyrim were the ones that actually came to Morrowind's aid, giving them somewhere to hide because of their scaly attackers. Around the time this entire mess was going on, the Empire basically exploded, when Ocasso, the guy we left in charge after Martin Septim's death, got assassinated, which could have been due to the Thalmor. A rule of thumb here, if there's an important assassination during this time period, the Thalmor probably could have had something to do with it. Now, once Titus Mede I, a Clovian warlord with mighty cojones, took the throne and patched together the Empire, the Thalmor had overthrown their own government, changing the Somerset Isles to Alinor, and they had one thing on their mind: getting the band back together. You see, the Bosmer were once again in another civil dispute, because of course they were. Can't you cannibals just get along for 5 minutes? Of course, the Thalmor stuck to the script, and by backing a coup, got the Bosmer to form the Third Aldmeri Dominion with them. At this point, the Empire was busy dealing with a flying island coming out of nowhere and causing havoc. I know, it's weird, there's a book about it, and no, we're not going over it now. Just note that the Empire had a lot going on and kinda just let the Thalmor do whatever. So they did. In the 42nd year of the 4th era, the Thalmor decided it was time for some friendly fire, and went after Altmer dissidents who had fled prosecution in Alinor, since, as much as these guys think Altmer are superior, they also don't like it when people disagree with them. Now, these dissidents fled to Sentinel, a city in Hammerfell, which was still a part of the Empire at the time. Long story short, they turned the city into a Korean barbecue. Well, at least one of its quarters, and, well, basically everybody in that quarter died. This was known as the Night of Green Fire, and on paper this probably should have been enough of a provocation to start a war. But again, the Empire had to deal with a floating island, so I guess they just didn't care. Imagine being Hammerfell in this situation. One of your major cities gets the Blackwater Bay treatment, and the Empire you're under is just saying, nah, you'll be fine. Still, the Aldmeri Dominion were missing the third member of their posse. If Alinor is Jesse and Valenwood is James, then Elsweyr is Meowth. This takes a bit longer, but in 4E98, the Void Nights occur, where the moons just vanish for 2 years. Don't ask me how this happened, I got nothing. That's an entirely different video topic, but some people say that the Thalmor did this somehow. I mean, how do you even go about making the moons vanish? You don't think Gru's working for the Altmer, do you? Now, while everyone thought it was kinda weird not to have the moons in the sky, the Khajiit went full panic mode. You see, they need the moons to determine their forms, called Furstock. We aren't quite sure what happened to the Khajiit during this period. It could have ranged from no new Khajiit being born to an epidemic of stillbirths or crazy mutants shooting out of their mums. Either way, when the moons finally came back, the Thalmor took credit, and this greatly diminished Imperial influence in the country. So much so that when the country's leader, the Main, was assassinated, again, possibly due to the Thalmor, the Medes couldn't stop the civil war that eventually split the country in two. These provinces were called Anaquina and Palatine, and both became client states of the Aldmeri Dominion, officially getting the band back together. Now it was time to get an Altmer butt on the Ruby Throne. In 4E171, the Aldmeri Dominion started the Great War, and I won't lie to you, it was pretty one-sided. While the Altmer was stuck in a stalemate against the people of Hammerfell, they stormed through Cyrodiil, capturing the Imperial city, thus believing they had won the war. Unfortunately for them, Titus Mede channeled his Chad of an ancestor for a final battle, and clutches up, recapturing the city and getting a peace agreement. Well, it wasn't actually Titus, it was the protagonist of the card game, but the world believed it was Titus, so what are you gonna do? Still, because the Thalmor ploughed through Imperial forces like they were a field, they had the upper hand in the peace agreement, thus leading to the White Gold Concordat, and I know for a fact they had the most devious smile cooking this up. The Dominion demanded a portion of South Hammerfell, and that Talos worship be banned. This then led to Hammerfell leaving the Empire, and I don't need to tell you the trouble that Talos worship ban caused. This also included the Blades getting decimated, and that practically leads us to where we're at in Skyrim, where the Empire is still reeling and the Thalmor are seemingly on top.
Do you for that? You what? Come here! What are you gonna do, bleed on me? I'm invincible! You're a loony. The Empire always triumphs! Haven't you? Come on then. Alright, we'll call it a draw.
Now, before we go on to what the Thalmor's endgame is, I have to tell everyone something they probably know. These lot are evil. I'm not talking force of nature evil like Alduin, or evil from a certain point of view like Ulfric Stormcloak. I'm talking comedically, insanely evil. You might be thinking, well, obviously they're elven supremacists. Of course they're evil, but they're somehow worse than that. They have that immense hate boner for Talos, as we've mentioned before, trying to remove his worship, but they also hate everyone who worships anyone that isn't in their pantheon. This includes the Daedra, so they hate the Dunmer, and the Bosmer for their iteration of Y'ffre. Despite being allies with Valenwood, the Thalmor are straight up purging the Bosmer there, which is just mental behaviour, and this comes straight from the horse's mouth with Malborn. Well, technically Delphine talking about Malborn, but she has no reason to lie about this. I also assume this purging extends to the more tribal Bosmer, and their way of life, which the Thalmor probably see as barbaric. Given how isolated these tribes tend to be, it would be easy to make sure no one hears about it. To do that to an enemy is one thing, but to an ally? It's utterly mental. What's even crazier is that the Thalmor don't even like other Aldmeri that much. We've already got the Knight of Green Fire as an example, but then there's the Psijic Order. They used to operate out of one of the islands in the Somerset Isles, being some of the most powerful Aldmeri mages, but saw what the Thalmor were doing, refused to cooperate, and took their island of Artaeum and left Nirn, because apparently that's something they can just do. They clearly oppose the Thalmor in places, since they turn up to help us with the Eye of Magnus after Ancano gets a taste of unlimited power. They will throw hands and try to eradicate literally anyone if they oppose them. Literally anyone. But that isn't even the maddest part. Elven supremacy is the Thalmor's goal, and you might think that they want to do it in the same way their ancestors, the Aelids, did it. The Aelids subjugated the Needs, a race of men, ruling from the White Gold Tower, until a demigod cow and a madman cosplaying as a crusader decided it was time to shake things up. This, while evil, would at least be understandable. And I'm talking logically, not ethically. From an ethical standpoint, enslaving people is obviously very, very evil and very wrong. I probably don't have to say that, but I also don't want people coming after me. Now, the Dunmer of Morrowind did something similar with the Argonians, hence the whole farm tools thing and the later revenge. But the Thalmor want to go even further beyond. They hate humanity with a passion that can only be matched by Gareth Bale's passion for golf, and thus hate the humans' main god, Lorcan. So the end goal is to just bin humanity. Get rid of them. Wholesale. They could just attempt to purge them off the face of Nirn, but their goal is a lot more extreme. You see, the Thalmor are so up themselves that they believe they should be gods again, and that every other race shouldn't exist, and they plan to do this with time travel. Kinda. Okay, this gets complicated, and I'm not 100% sure if this is real official lore, but it's a very popular theory at the very least. Kind of like Game of Thrones' R plus L equals J, so buckle yourselves in. Now, if you cast your mind back, you'll remember that I mentioned the Crystal Tower. It's one of the towers of Nirn, and that's a tower with a capital T, which stabilises Mundus, the universe. These towers are also capable of great magical feats, and some examples include the Numidium, known as the Brass Tower, which is an artificial example, and the White Gold Tower, which could have potentially turned Cyrodiil from a jungle to what we see in Oblivion. They can rewrite reality and cause dragon breaks, essentially fractures in time that cause alternate realities to be true at once. Some are literal towers, like the White Gold Tower and the Crystal Tower, while others are geographical monuments, like the Red Mountain being the Red Tower, or the Throat of the World potentially being the Snow Tower, I think. Honestly, the Snow Tower's a bit of a weird one. Now, these towers clearly have an effect on the world, which can be seen in the prophecy of the Dragonborn.
When misrule takes its place at the 8 corners of the world, when the brass tower rocks and time is reshaped, when the thrice blessed fail and the red tower trembles, when the dragonborn ruler loses his throne and the white tower falls, when the snow tower lies sundered, kingless, bleeding, the world eater wakes and the wheel turns upon the last dragonborn.
The Thalmor's plan is to destroy these towers, and by doing so the world will revert to the Convention, essentially where the rules of Nirn and Mundus were being shaped, at least from my understanding. The belief is that the Thalmor will go back here to prevent humanity from ever being created, and also ensure that the Aldmeri can remain as gods. This will essentially mean the destruction of the world as we know it, and the Thalmor might be uncomfortably close to realising this goal. The Numidium is gone. The Crystal Tower is destroyed, and the Red Mountain blew up during the Red Year. According to the prophecy of the Dragonborn, the Snow Tower isn't in good shape either. This leaves the Adamantine Tower in High Rock, the Green Sap in Valenwood, and the Orichalk, thought to be in the sunken continent of Yokuda, where the Red Guards came from. There are also metaphysical towers, but long story short, the Thalmor might not be far off realising their goal, which, as I said before, is a delightfully fantastical mix of pure insanity and evil. Now, will they? Probably not. If the Thalmor win, Bethesda can't milk the Elder Scrolls series, and if we look at the Dwemer, trying to make an entire race divine usually doesn't go too well. If it ever gets that far, the Psijic Order probably have to intervene en masse, and if it goes beyond even that, maybe the gods themselves will get involved. They already did in the Oblivion Crisis, and by Akatosh sending the last Dragonborn to put Alduin in a timeout. So if it gets that far, I'm sure Kain, Talos, or even Lorcan will send an avatar or something. That's assuming the Thalmor are in as good shape as we think. With all the secret purging, there's a chance that resistance groups are being set up in the Somerset Isles, especially because the Thalmor have no issue with making enemies of their own people. But the problem is, we know so little about the Elder Scrolls 6 that it's impossible to tell what direction Bethesda wants to go in. That's even assuming the direction they have planned after Skyrim is the same one they have planned now, 14 years later. The Thalmor could even get off-screened between games, falling to a revolution. I doubt it, since they are one of Skyrim's most interesting factions, but I wouldn't put it past Todd and crew at this point. Still, thank you for watching. The Thalmor are a weird topic, considering that they parallel a certain group led by a mediocre painter, shall we say. Despite how evil these guys are, I feel like people take them pretty lightly. They see a patrol here and there, decimate them and go about their day thinking they saved some Nords from subjugation, but oh no, it's way worse. These guys aren't your local, I don't want them living in my neighbourhood kind of racist. They're your, I hate you so much that I'm willing to revert the world to its infant stage so I can stop you and your entire race from ever existing kind of racist. It's mental. But you know what else is mental? Making it this far through a video and not liking, subscribing and commenting something witty. And hopefully I'll see you in another one down the line.
Bells on the dawn.